What's up troops, it's me TheTacticalBrit, and I'm here today with a brand new video. And as many of you know, I am very much pro new Conquest. Now, to be honest with you, that sounded like a cult, which is somewhat scary, but effectively there's a big argument going on in the community about the old Conquest versus the new Conquest, how things stack up, and which one is the better system, and which one Battlefield 1 should utilize. And of recent, I've personally been on the side of the new Conquest, just because of certain opinions that I have. But today, after a lot of sort of Reddit posts and video posts, I'd like to go ahead and try and debunk some of the arguments for the old system. So today I'm going to be using one video and one Reddit post that particularly summarize the points for the old system very well and point out what they believe to be the flaws of the new system. So the first video is LevelCap's recent video on the new Conquest system and his opinion on it, and the next bit of content is a Reddit post. Now, I just want to point out that this is supposed to be like an intellectual discussion. This is supposed to be like an open idea, and I respect the opinions of both of these two content creators, and this isn't some kind of like, oh yeah, you know, screw you LevelCap, I'm going at your throat with your content, and how dare you have an opinion. That's not the idea behind it. I just want to like go through some of his points, go through some of the points on Reddit, and discuss them, and just sort of explain how I feel that certain points that have been made don't quite add up. I'm actually a big fan of some of LevelCap's content, and I'm a big fan of some of the Battlefield subreddit content as well, regardless of what opinion it bodes in. So I just want this to be a sort of mature and open debate about the Conquest system, as opposed to screw these guys, you know what I mean? It's supposed to be like a discussion. So let's do that.
Now later, way down the road, the devs decided to rebalance the point system for Battlefield 4, and they made it so that if you're actually on the point as your team captured it, you would get 400 bonus points instead of the 150 from the old system, which would allow you to basically get a total of 650 points if you captured an enemy flag all the way, neutralized it, and captured it all the way up. This is significantly more than 400 total points compared to what you could get with the previous system. It made it much more valuable. I think they might have gone a little bit overboard. It certainly didn't ruin Conquest in any way. It just put a much bigger emphasis on capturing points and getting people on those objectives. Now, the danger you run with adding more and more points to capturing flags and just being within a certain area, like attributing to how many points you get, is that it can get people to bunch up around objectives. It can get players to rush in blindly onto points, not really checking their corners or watching out for threats. So basically, it can attribute to bad in-game practices. The more points you put on the flag cap, the more ridiculous antics you'll see, or the more poor gameplay surrounding getting on those points and not really watching out for threats or backing up your teammates in strategic or meaningful ways.
So within the opening few minutes of LevelCap's most recent video, he effectively explains that flag captures and flag points have been increasing progressively throughout Battlefield, and at the moment of Battlefield 4 they had gone up quite significantly, and by Battlefield 1 they have increased flag captures to a very high point. So that was his first point, and his first point effectively being summarized was saying that because there are more points on Conquest flags, there are too many people in certain areas and the game becomes very compact and bunched up. Now, this, in my opinion, isn't a very strong argument. First and foremost, because the game mode is Conquest. We are playing an objective-based game mode that is focusing on us capturing flags. And the problem I found with Battlefield 4, Battlefield 3, and even Battlefield Hardline to an extent, is that Conquest is incredibly disjointed. There are entire fields of maps that are completely empty because nobody is there, or there's just nothing going on. And a good example of this is Goldwood Railway, right? So in Goldwood Railway, you have the two objectives at the north of the map, which are the infantry-based objectives, and you have F to the south, and in between you have the odd objective dotted through and out. There is no fluid gameplay between these objectives, and there is no fluidity of the overall map because the objectives just don't have a net movement of players. Now, the pro of the new Conquest system is that because points are very much focused on objectives, you get a lot of points for focusing on objectives. Players are moving between them more progressively and more seamlessly, and this means we have a much more fluid system of gameplay. A great example of this was the closed alpha in Battlefield 1. This is honestly the first time, and obviously some of this is attributed to the map design, but it was the first time I felt I saw a fluid movement of players between objectives objectives, and there wasn't this just sort of random facade of lone wolves sort of out in the distance or in the middle of nowhere for no apparent reason. And it increased the intensity of the game mode, and I personally think it overall improved Conquest. Level Cap's next point is that flag captures are effectively a huge way to gain points, and he claims that to an extent that promotes in-game bad play or bad practices whilst playing the game mode, because players are focusing on getting as many points as they can and harvesting as many points as they can. He then goes on to state that this is increased pretty much by nearly double in Battlefield 1 from Battlefield 4. And the way you could debunk this is just looking at simple logic, in my opinion. So his general claim, if we were to summarize it, is that because there are so many points on the one flag, it promotes bad play, or it promotes a certain level of play which isn't what we have come to expect from Battlefield. And the way to get around this is just to look at Conquest as a game mode. Conquest is an objective-based game mode. The idea behind Conquest is to win as many flags as possible in order to win the game, and the way you get the most points in Conquest is by winning the game, and to do that you need the most flags. Now, it seems to me that lots of people have this sort of idea, or this sort of general understanding at the moment of Battlefield 1 that these flags exist and you just walk up to them, capture them, and leave. And that really isn't the case. There seems to be this overall perception that it's just as simple as showing up and leaving. These flags are objectives. There will be fights for these objectives. The players who play badly on said objectives will not win the objective. And it doesn't encourage bad play by teammates. It doesn't encourage flag rushing, because the point is that if you've got a couple of defenders on the flag who are well set up, know their tactics and know what they're going to do, they're going to completely decimate people who are just running onto the flag. Whereas if you have an attacking team who is going to strategically take an objective by playing well, getting as many kills as they can, and overall just outperforming the defensive side of things, then they will capture the flag. These aren't just objectives that people show up to and leave. These are objectives that are contested through skill-based combat on the objectives. You have to be better than your opponent to kill your opponent, and therefore capture the flag. It's not something that just sort of miraculously happens, and that isn't a general sort of attack or anything. It just appears to be this overall idea that I've seen on the internet, that these objectives are just kind of there and you just kind of show up. It doesn't happen that way. It doesn't happen that way in Battlefield 4. It doesn't happen that way in any Battlefield title. There is always contention for objectives, especially when the map design and the overall game design encourages more people at objectives to contest them.
Now, in Battlefield 1, they took things to a whole new level. Luckily, the game's still in alpha and there's plenty of things that they can change, but considering that Conquest has already redefined the entire ticket system, I'm pretty surprised that they've made a huge point change to the flag caps. Now get this, flag capturing in Battlefield 1, as far as I can tell, can be worth up to 1,350 points. That's over double of what Battlefield 4 offers. It's triple of what the original Battlefield 4 point scoring system, and it's almost quadruple of what Battlefield 3 offered in points. Mind you, the rest of the scoring system in the game hasn't changed too dramatically. There are a few more bonus points here and there for assists and stuff like that with kills, so you could argue that other points have also gone up a tiny bit, but nothing compared to the percentage that flag capping points have gone up by comparison. Simply marking the objective as the squad leader gives you 200 bonus points. Capturing the point itself is 500, neutralizing is 250, and every tick is 25 points. This is an insane amount of points, considering that every kill in the game, assuming you do 100% damage to your enemy, is worth 100 points plus another 20 for the kill. If you get a headshot or other bonuses in there, you can up that a little bit. But basically, a flag cap is worth over 10 basic kills. So there's a huge emphasis on capturing the flag, much more so than anything else in the game. And I think this is going to be a huge detriment to the scoreboard and how it influences people to play the game. There's now going to be such a big influence to actually get on the point and capture a point and mark it as the squad leader that I think it's actually going to get to an exploitive level. It no longer makes sense to hang back a little bit and support your squad mates as they go in for the flag while you take a higher vantage vantage point. In addition to that, one of the most basic conquest tactics that's been used for a long time is going to become unviable, at least to somebody who cares about their score on the scoreboard. And that's when you and a group of squad fight for a point, you sort of take it over, kill the guys on it, and then you know you're going to win that capture because nobody's around there. Instead of leaving everybody there on that point waiting for it to capture, you leave one or two guys behind while everybody else moves on. Now that's not going to make sense because the amount of points that those players are giving up by moving on is just too drastic for that to be a good tactic, or at least the tactic that matters to those players. Even though it's a good strategy for winning the game as your team, as an individual, it really hurts your score.
His next argument roughly goes along the basis of talking about how kills are worth significantly less than capture points, and obviously in Battlefield 4, kills also accounted towards the ticket rate in the game and the amount of tickets you had. But the problem people seem to have with this, and the problem I personally have with this, is that people have kind of misconstrued what Conquest is about. Like, for me, Conquest is objective-based gameplay with team deathmatch on the side, but for other people it appears to be that Conquest is team deathmatch with objectives on the side. It's an objective-based game mode. Conquest is about capturing flags, so the central and pinnacle focus of the game mode should be capturing flags. So logically speaking, the points for capturing flags should be significantly more than killing players. And linking back to my previous point, kills are supposed to be a supplement to how you play the game. If you can kill somebody better than they can kill you, or your team is playing better and getting more kills than the other team, then logically speaking you will capture more flags and get more points. So you still have to be good with kills. This isn't something that's been thrown out the window. The idea behind capturing objectives is that you can clear it effectively to make the capture. He goes on to discuss hanging back and having a sort of Overwatch basis as a tactic for getting onto the objective, like somebody who's not in the objective mode but sniping or perhaps covering fire to allow people to capture the objective. And he kind of says that this doesn't encourage that kind of tactic. But the problem with that is that if the overall goal of Conquest is to capture objectives, then surely it does encourage this. It encourages people to play this way, or play for the security and safety of the objective. And whilst I understand his point is mostly on the basis of players will want points so they'll just go into the cap zone, players who actually want to win the game will be aware of what they need to do to capture a point. And I think a good example of this is evidenced in the Battlefield 1 closed alpha. Sure, there were lots of people on the objectives, but I can name you countless and countless times where I saw people on the fields in Objective Edward, or I saw people on the hills off the Objective Bar, or I saw people just outside Objective Delta hammering the building with shells and things like that. It wasn't a case of people just flooding the objective and trying to get onto the zone. It was a case of people actually trying to kill people to clear it first. And I feel as though that has been slightly overlooked. And he argues that this tactic is unviable, and to me that doesn't really make a lot of sense, because this tactic is to kill players to get the objective, and we're doing the exact same thing. We need to kill players to get the objective, so this tactic is still going to exist a lot. I know I did it. I know there were plenty of instances where I hang back as a recon and I sniped people on the objective before I went in, or I supported some squad mates who had gone in. And admittedly I can't just base my entire opinion on what I've seen, but overall during that sort of closed alpha period, it wasn't flooding the objective, it was trying to get the objective by any means necessary. And I feel as though he's kind of used the example of a player who only cares about himself and only cares about his points and only cares about getting the most XP he can and things like that. And if we're honest, a large percentage of Battlefield players aren't like that. They want to win the game, and therefore they'll do what's necessary to win. So it's not about getting points, it's about winning, and winning does involve using these tactics.
It's also very detrimental to aggressive players who like to be the first on the point, the first into the action, the first people to try and clear off the enemy players defending the point. This was a really fun thing to do in Battlefield 3. If you got 1 or 2 kills but then went down trying to clear the way for your teammates, and you missed out on some of the cap points, it wasn't that big a deal. The capture was worth 350 points. If you got 2 kills, you might get a couple hundred points. You weren't really falling behind. You were still having fun. Plus, if you got a revive on the point to catch up with some of the cap points, you would still even out at the end of the day. However, in Battlefield 1, if you're the first one on the point, you get 2, 3 kills even, but then go down, and the rest of your team gets there and clears off the last 1 or 2 guys and captures the point, and you miss out on those cap points, you're falling way behind your team. Even though you did the majority of the work clearing out the point, if you miss that capture, you're getting screwed in the point department, and it'll show you at the bottom of the scoreboard every time.
He then discusses the tactic of allowing a player to run to the next objective whilst one flag is still being captured. And this is the kind of disjointed gameplay I was talking about earlier. Now, the problem with Battlefield 4 and Battlefield 3 is that we had lots of just sort of clusters of 1 or 2 players heading towards objectives. You'd kill them whilst you're defending, and it would just die down. It would just be like a good period of a few minutes waiting for something to happen, and that happened so often. Now, because lots of people are of course staying on objectives to get the points that they've earned through capturing and killing the players there, it means that we now have groups and clusters of players flooding between different objectives. It's no longer a simple case of 1 or 2 guys running forward, it's a case of an entire squad of 5 or 10 people going forward. And this creates interesting gameplay. The gameplay behind Battlefield 1 is a lot more intense. The amount of times where you had a good group of 10 or more players coming to one objective to fight you for it was huge, and I love that about Battlefield 1's Conquest, and I don't think it should change. I think that should stay there because it makes Conquest, as a mode which is supposed to represent Battlefield the most, which is supposed to be action-packed and fueled and fun, that's what Battlefield 1 New Conquest delivered because there were more players flooding between points. The point he just made seems very contradictory to an earlier point he made. Earlier he stated that because there were so many players going to objectives, it would encourage bad gameplay, you know, people were just rushing them, people are dying, there's no point, right? Well, he just kind of encouraged that as a tactic in Battlefield 4, and he said, well, you got the kills anyway, so it would even out if you didn't get the capture or your teammates got the capture later. So surely the new Conquest system is encouraging smarter gameplay because the capture is worth more. You have to be more strategically aware, you have to be roaming in numbers. If you go there as a lone wolf and you don't get the capture and you die, you lose out on points because you've played badly. That isn't a positive tactic to lone wolf an objective, right? So to me, that just seemed a little bit contradictory to his previous point, because encouraging good gameplay is moving in numbers, it's working together. Bad gameplay is lone wolfing an objective and hoping for the best. And the fact that you don't get points for lone wolfing in Battlefield 1 encourages group gameplay, and team play as well, which is what I want Battlefield to be. And that just seemed a little bit off in terms of the overall direction of Conquest as a mode.
It feels like DICE has really taken sort of a blinded approach to encouraging people to PTFO in Battlefield. I want players to play the objective just as much as the next guy, but I want them to play it intelligently. The absolute ludicrous emphasis on capturing a flag with the huge point bonus now, combined with the new ticket system, basically making it so that when you kill soldiers, it no longer affects the ticket system, is a huge shift up in the way that Conquest is going to be played, and it's ultimately going to end up looking like a game of bunch ball. And if you've never heard that term before, it's basically what I call soccer when a whole bunch of little kids are playing it for the first time. Both teams all just completely run at the soccer ball. Nobody's playing their positions. Nobody's staying back or playing strategically. Everybody just wants to kick that ball, and all strategy completely breaks down. And that's what DICE is doing to Conquest. If people started playing Conquest the way that DICE is designing it to be played for Battlefield 1, it's going to look like a clusterfuck, and it's not going to have any sort of advanced or fun strategy. It's just going to be about getting on that point as fast as possible, converting that point, and moving on to the next one, because there's no emphasis on doing other things in the game. There's no emphasis on supporting your teammates. There's no emphasis in defending points. There's no emphasis in playing in airplanes and supporting infantry from the ground. If you want to maximize your points, all you have to do is get on a flag and capture that point. And ultimately, I think this is actually going to hurt the higher level of strategy that's been available in the game. And I think DICE really needs to take a hard look at what they're doing with the point system, and in addition to that, the ticket system as well. Ultimately, they might even fall into a similar mistake of Battlefield Hardline, where when that game came out, people were just driving around cars not killing each other because they would get a huge amount of points just from keeping those cars at top speed, and you get servers full of people not killing each other, just grinding out points. If people figured out the system in Battlefield 1 and they realized that they could just run around capping flags as fast as possible, that's what you're going to see. You're going to see servers of people exploiting the system because the points are so insanely high if you just cap flags and nothing else. I think DICE is making a huge mistake here, and they need to go back. To me, Battlefield Conquest has always been about getting into cool battles, being in vehicles, air vehicles, tanks, fighting as infantry, blowing up buildings, having these awesome epic battles that are largely driven by the Conquest system of moving from one flag point to another because there is a point reward behind it, and it ultimately affects which team wins and which team loses. But putting a huge emphasis on those points is going to turn the variety of things that you can do and the variety of strategies in the game and really simplify the crap out of it, and ultimately I think it's going to kill a game mode that I otherwise have.
So the next point is that Conquest has just become some kind of mess of players running out objectives and trying to get as many points as possible and not encouraging positive gameplay that he stated was like lone wolfing. And that just seems so far to the opposite of what I think Conquest should be. Now, in my personal opinion, the way Conquest works at the moment is one of the best ways I've seen Conquest work. And there seems to be this perception that these objectives are things that you just run at, and you run at them and you capture them, and then the other guys run at them, and then there's some kind of scuffle in between, and then eventually one of you gets the point, right? And that just seems to be the overall perception that I've seen. And again, it completely withdraws the entire principle that you need to be skillful to get the objective. You need to work as a team to get the objective. You need to kill players to get the objective and be better than the other team. And again, he seemed to state that like people would just run at the objective, it wouldn't be anything positive, it would be lots of people just running into this sort of mashup, right? But in actuality, if one team runs into it like a mashup and the other team says, do you know what, we're going to hang back, we're going to pick them off, we're going to go in, we're going to do this tactic, they will be successful at gaining the point. They will get the capture and they will hold it for a longer amount of time than the team that just bum rushes the objective. And that kind of perception, I feel, of these objectives just existing for somewhere to run to as opposed to somewhere to kind of strategically attack seems to be one to me that needs to change. And something I noticed quite a lot during the closed alpha and whilst playing the alpha itself was that the teams that played better per objective were the teams that won the game. It wasn't the team that threw the most players at the objective, it was the team that played better per objective, defended objectives better, and attacked objectives better, that overall landslide victoried a single match. So the next point he makes is that a lot of the sort of defensive, a lot of the planes, a lot of the vehicles, a lot of the content around Conquest has been decreased due to the focus of Conquest flags. And again, there are two ways to look at this. And firstly, I do agree with him to some extent because I feel as though support points for objectives need to be increased. So for example, getting kills whilst defending an objective should probably go up. Getting a kill on an objective from an aerial vehicle or potentially taking out a ground target from an aerial vehicle should increase, and that way incentivizing focused play on objectives and play that benefits players who aren't exactly entirely focusing on the objective but somewhat focusing on the objective to try and support it. And I totally agree with him in that respect, that makes sense to me. But again, there seems to be that sort of perspective that these objectives don't require skill. These objectives require aerial vehicles to take out tanks, to take out infantry. These objectives require players to go on it and play skillfully. And whilst I understand his point is that players won't do that because the points are incentivizing them to maximize points, again, I don't feel like that's how Battlefield players operate. We operate on the basis that we do our best to win the objective. If I saw a tank on the objective, I would take it out. If I saw a lot of infantry on the objective, I would take them out, and I'd do that by any means necessary in whatever respect I felt was the best way forward. And I feel like a lot of players do take that approach. So to an extent, I do agree with him. We do need to incentivize certain aspects of playing around objectives, but by no means does that mean that all of these aspects have been entirely taken away from the objective. If you have, for example, objective butter, which is swarmed by tanks, you're going to need a plane to take them out. You're going to need people on the ground to take them out. It's not going to be something that you just walk into and take. It requires skill, it requires strategy, and it requires teamwork to do it. So the next point he makes is that, for example, in the Hotwire game mode, we saw people just sort of like driving around in cars and capturing objectives and literally just farming points. And to a degree, I understand his point here. I understand that because there's lots of points on objectives, maybe people don't try and fight. Maybe they run to objectives. Maybe they get in a car, try capture it, and move on, right? But in the same principle, people who tried doing that in actual servers, and I mean servers that actually focused on playing the game and actually winning the game mode, were completely blown out of the water. It wasn't something you could do. Hotwire, for example, if you tried doing that in an actual server, you'd just get killed. It's quite simple. And of course, exploits to things like that always are going to exist. If for some reason players found that they could get points easily on Capture the Flag, they'd probably make those servers on PC where there's no kills and you just run around and capture the flag, right? And that's not down to a gameplay design, that's down to the fact that players are douchebags sometimes and they will do those things. But most of those servers ended up getting shut down anyway. But in actuality, there will not be a circumstance in which players just run to objectives in Conquest and capture them and move on, because they will always be defended to some respect. In St. Quentin's Scar, for example, I can hardly remember an example of where I went to an objective and I capture it just by myself, or, you know, once I'd finished capturing, I just walked away. There was always a form of contention. Either somebody was on the objective that I had to kill and outgun and outskill, or once I'd captured the objective because maybe, for example, they weren't focusing in that area, there would be an instant retaliation and players would come my way and I would have to defend that objective by myself if I so happened to have lone wolfed it. And I understand there's a lot of theoretical ideas that he feels could go wrong, but in my opinion, the ideas that DICE have put forward are ideas that encourage positive gameplay as opposed to encouraging negative gameplay, like just running between points, because people are aware of just how vital these tickets are and just how vital a flag capture is. And I feel as though defensive on flags, being defensive on a flag is ever more important now. It's even more important than it has been ever before. And I do agree to him with an extent that we need to increase kills on, for example, flags, adding more points on defensive. But incentivizing defensive is something that they can do, but changing the entire system back is something that I feel is very negative and wouldn't work in the favour of Battlefield 1. So he says that Conquest is about having huge open battles and having this sort of huge action scene, and it represents what we love about Battlefield, right? And I entirely agree with him on that. That really is something that I understand, because Conquest is the biggest representation of what Battlefield is all about. And if I'm honest, his sort of perspective of that is very limited. And the reason I say that is because, let's be honest, 5 out of sort of 8 or maybe 7 out of 10 Conquest matches aren't like that. They are not like that. They are games where you capture a couple of objectives, there's a bit of contention between pods, but ultimately a lot of it's disjointed, there isn't a lot of action at times, and the best example of this is the perspective of brand new players, right? Now, brand new players to Battlefield 3 played Conquest, which was supposed to be our pinnacle mode, and ended up wandering around for ages without finding players to kill, and it created this entire negative prospect of Battlefield. The big maps weren't working, and the big maps didn't encourage action-based gameplay, and a lot of people agreed with those people who had made those new claims, and a lot of new players did feel that way. I, for one, when I played Battlefield 3 Conquest, in certain maps did feel that way, if I'm honest. Now, Battlefield 4 did improve that. We had, a real focus on having big battles, a real focus on having those sort of only in Battlefield moments and variety of gameplay. But again, the disjointedness of the maps and the inability of there to be fluid gameplay between objectives at most maps and during most gameplay examples really did dumb down that experience. But in Battlefield 1, for example, in the closed alpha, now bearing in mind this is a singular map, and I know it sounds very strange to base my entire perspective on the game on a singular map, but the map design was done well, and I hope that is a continued design. But for me, I saw variety of gameplay in the closed alpha. I saw variety of tactics. I saw games that never were quite the same. I saw games where aeroplanes dominated. I saw games where tanks really did their job. And I saw games where there would be 20 versus 20 on a single objective. And I really loved that. That was high intensity, that was action based, and that was what I saw Conquest as, and what I think Conquest should be about. And I feel like there's this sort of end goal of what Conquest should be as an action-based game mode, but there is no sort of one way to get there. Everybody sort of believes that maybe the Battlefield 4 system's right, maybe the Battlefield 3 system's right, maybe the Battlefield 1 system's right, But in my opinion, the best way to do that is to encourage objective-based gameplay and encourage fluidity between objectives, and that is what the new system of Battlefield 1 Conquest does. And also, he also mentioned one last thing about killing off the game mode, and I think it's done the exact opposite. I think it's actually revitalized the game mode and increased player numbers. Now, a good example of this is that I know this is true for lots of YouTubers, and I know it's certainly true for me. And ask how many YouTubers are out there. Ask them if they recorded gameplay on Conquest or if they recorded gameplay on Rush, and then you're going to get a very clear answer as to which one was very more potent for them to record. Now, I know this is true for at least a good 4 or 5 YouTubers myself. I know it's definitely true for me. Whenever I wanted to record gameplay for Battlefield 4, I knew that I would have more high intensity action, I'd have more infantry kills, I'd have general more fun on Rush because there was a focus on objectives. Whereas in Conquest, I could wander around for a few minutes and not get a single kill, and then the gameplay would feel very disjointed. I'd have to cut and paste here and there, and a good percentage of Conquest games that you will see online for Battlefield 4 are Operation Metro or Operation Locker, or they're going to be a Conquest game in DLC such as Dragon's Teeth, or maybe even some maps of Second Assault. But because there was so sort of in between maps, there was no fluidity between every single map. Lots of people's Conquest gameplay focused on maps where there was a huge focus on objectives, or there were lots of players in one space, and lots of people played Rush in games like Obliteration because they were focused on objectives, and that's how they got the best gameplay. So that's it for Level Cap's video, and we're going to go on to a Reddit post now on the Battlefield 1 Reddit, which has been heavily discussed. And Level Cap's video was a good video. I understand a lot of his points, and he made some points for me that did make a lot of sense, such as incentivizing gameplay around the flags in order to make everything a more fluid system as opposed to focus entirely on points on flags. And his opinion is very reflective of a lot of people's opinions on the new Conquest system, and there is no need to discredit it because he does make some really good points, but I personally believe that a lot of the points he made could be sort of undone with a little bit of thinking about certain ways in which the game mode works and certain places here and there. But again, this is just my opinion on his opinion, which is reflective of a lot of people's opinion. And I chose Level Cap's video because he very well summarized a lot of the points that have been made. And you know, I thought it was a very good video explaining how people felt and how he personally felt too. But anyways, on to the Reddit posts, and I'm going to go through the list of points that people have made on this Reddit post, or at least OP, as people regard them on Reddit. And I can't use his actual username, or at least I might if he lets me, if I talk to him at some point. But there tends to be quite rules on Reddit where you're not allowed to use people's usernames when you post content onto the same subreddit, because obviously, you know, some people take it out of proportion, some people will send bad messages to these people, and obviously you don't want that. You just want this to be a good discussion. But if OP is watching this video, this is an incredibly intricate post with some really good opinions and some really good ideas, and although I'm going to be critiquing them and saying, no, you got this wrong and you got this wrong, I think it's really great that he's discussed it to this extent, and I think that's the kind of sort of overall discussion that we should be like positively encouraging in the Battlefield community to make Battlefield 1 the game that we want it to be. So point number 1, dying costs nothing. And reading through this paragraph again, something I discussed with Level Cap's video comes up. He says here, if it's undefended, great, capture it. If it's defended and the whole squad dies, who cares? Respawn and rush another flag and do the same again and just do everything as quickly as possible. Again, to me, this is a point that misses out the fact that skillful teams and skillful players will take objectives skillfully and try and out-skillfully play the other team. If you rush an objective and die, and you go back and you rush another objective and die, and you rush another objective and die, you're not going to win the game. If you play tactically for an objective, kill the guys on the objective, capture the objective, then you've played well and you are going to win the game. And it seems to me that people think that dying costs nothing in this game, where in actuality, dying means a lot. You need numbers on the objective. You need to outplay people. You need to outnumber and outgun people on the objective to get the objective. And I understand the sort of idea behind medics losing out here, because to me that makes a lot of sense, and I feel like medic roles should be increased in some kind of capacity. A good example was by Battle Nonsense, who suggested increasing respawn times, for example, to make rushing gameplay less likely and give medics a better role. The next one is no more choosing which flags to hold. Now, this to me is a point that doesn't seem to make a lot of sense to me, just because your choices of flags that you hold still happen in Battlefield 1. Like, for example, you captured your 2 objectives that were closer to your base, and then everybody went for the central objective, or they went for an objective that was on the side, and that was how they did things. And you do capture and hold said objectives. You do pick and choose which flags you wanted to use and which flags you wanted to hold due to their strategical value. So for example, for me, I personally captured objective Butter quite a lot because it gave me a huge ground advantage, and I played with my squad in a sense that because I regularly used recon, getting that height advantage on objective Delta, which was further down, was incredibly helpful, and getting a good view on objective Charlie, which was just across the field, was again incredibly helpful. And people still do strategically choose which objectives they want to take, and I don't feel as though that has something that has changed in the new system or even been infected at all. Next up is too much reward for getting one flag, and the incentive here is apparently offense and never to defend. And whilst I agree with him to a partial extent, I don't agree with him fully. So the incentive is of course offense, and you'll find a lot of people will run to the next objective as opposed to defending an objective. And to me, that makes sense, and I agree with him in that manner, and I agree with Level Cap and him that defending an objective should be heavily more incentivized if offending an objective is incentivized in which the way it is. So the fact that you get lots of points for capturing an objective also means that you should get lots of points for defending an objective, or they should balance out to an even standard, which makes sense. But in actuality, getting a reward for one flag and getting so much reward for one flag makes sense as long as it's balanced out with the defensive, and as long as that makes it an equal amount of attacking and defending of both equal incentive. The next point is that there is no role for planes, artillery, or defenders, and this to me is a complete myth. Maybe not the defender one. I agree with him to a partial extent on defenders, because I spoke just previously in that last point about defensive play needing to be incentivized, but there is a role for planes and there is a role for artillery again, and I agree partially with Level Cap on this, that those roles need to be incentivized for taking out objectives or taking out people on certain flags. So perhaps maybe you get extra points for killing a flag on an objective that is a very high amount of points that perhaps compensates for you not being able to get the cap flagture because you're in the tank or artillery or you're in the plane. But in actuality, again, this is what it comes down to. If there is a tank on the objective, you need a tank. If there is a plane surrounding the objective and bombing the objective, you need to take it out with the plane. And that's what you need to do to capture the objective to get your team to win the game. And I understand their point here is that the amount of points on objectives just means that people are going to rush them. They're not going to think about using planes because they don't give them enough points. But the point here is that in actuality, the new system isn't the problem here with that. It's the fact that perhaps the new system needs a little bit of rejigging to make these roles a bit more efficient and more valued in terms of points when capturing or defending objectives. No role for behemoths is the next one, and I partially agree with him on this one too. Now, the behemoth gives you less players because more players are in the behemoth, and to a degree that actually hurts your overall goal and what you're trying to do, because you want to capture the flag, you need players to capture the flag, right? But at the same token, the behemoth can deal absolutely massive damage on an objective and wipe out an entire team defending a singular objective, and I've seen this in action in the Battlefield 1 closed alpha, and it clears the way for people to clean sweep objectives or capture them quite quickly. So in my opinion, the behemoth, yes, needs some rejigging. It needs some rejigging in terms of how the new system works, maybe perhaps by taking less players off the field but being equally as powerful, but that's just something that needs to be looked at. The next 2 points on whack-a-mole out of control and new scoring system incentivizing rushing flags is something I've covered before, and talking about how skill equals skill when it comes to objectives, and these objectives aren't just things that you walk up to and capture. There is always some form of contention. But I do partially agree again on the fact that defensive gameplay needs more incentivization. So the final point is less chance for the underdogs, and this is a point that you can't argue against because the new system does do this. And the only way you can even potentially argue against it is just saying, well, the other team needs to be better, they need to capture the objectives more than the other team, and, you know, that's how it needs to run down. But the problem is that that never really is the case in all public game modes, and in actuality, a lot of the time, one team is going to do better than the other team for a good percentage of the match, and then it will flip back over and there'll be like sort of a back and forth in between. And the new system doesn't facilitate that back and forth as well as the old system. That is something, as an argument, you just have to concede, because it doesn't do that particularly well. And I think the way around this is to incentivize defensive gameplay more, make it equally as impressive as offensive gameplay, and that way flags should even out. Players should be gridlocking, they should be attacking objectives evenly, they should be going for things that, you know, should allow less landslide victories and more close-cut victories. And that's if defensive gameplay is improved, and improved in terms of how much it's worth. But that's about it for today's video, guys. I went over a lot of points and there's a lot to go through, which is why this is so long. I'd like to thank the OP of the Reddit and of course Level Cap for his videos, because those videos and these subreddits are the discussions that we need about Battlefield 1 Conquest to voice our concerns and our perspectives. And I imagine right now it's a nightmare for DICE listening to so many different views saying so many different things. But this is just my opinion on the new Conquest system and how some of the arguments for the old Conquest system and against the new one don't exactly make sense. And I'm not expecting a lot of you to agree with me. I'm not expecting there to be an agreement. I want this to be a discussion. So please let me know what you think in the comment section down below. Please let me know what you think about the new Conquest, what you think about the old Conquest, and what you think DICE should do for Battlefield 1. As always, thank you for watching. It's been me, TheTacticalBrit, and I'll see you again soon in another video.